Hello and welcome to Handy with Handguns. Today we're going to clean and disassemble the Sentinel R-107. This is an old mid-60s revolver, and it is one of my favorite handguns to shoot. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do is go ahead and pop the cylinder out and make sure that it is completely unloaded. And then we are going to examine what we need to do. So one of the primary tools I'm going to have here is a 1/8 inch punch. And now, first thing I'm going to need to do is use that to remove this cylinder from the firearm. So I shouldn't have popped it back in there, but I'm going to go ahead and pop the cylinder back out so that I can take this 1/8 inch punch and use that to depress this plunger that exists right here on the pivot point for the revolver. So it's just like a little button inside there. You'll push it down, and then you can work the cylinder back and forth until it slides completely out. Now, when you do that, the plunger will probably pop all the way out or a little part of the way out, and that spring will rest inside there. Now, usually that kind of comes out with the plunger, but it may not. Now, these screws, I already unscrewed them, so this is going to be really fast and efficient, unlike we'll be at home. You need to make sure you don't lose that screw back. I don't really know quite the right term for that, but when you loosen it, that'll fall out, and you'll need that for when you put it back in. So we're going to go ahead and take those grips off, and this will expose this return spring that exists here for the hammer. Actually, I don't think that would be referred to as a return spring. I think its term is a mainspring. But yeah, so now we're going to move on to removing this plate here. So there's two pins. I've already driven them most of the way out with the hole punch just to make things a good bit easier. Because this thing has never actually been cleaned since I owned it. And I've owned it for way too long. And I mean, like, I clean it in kind of a normal fashion, in that whenever I leave the range, I would always, roll the cylinder out and clean the barrel, clean the cylinder, and clean all the things that I could get to without taking the firearm apart like I am right now. This is the first time I've ever taken it completely apart in about 15 years. Now, the first pin, the forward pin there, that is the rear pin. The rear pin came out fairly easy. This forward pin is being a nightmare because whoever previously disassembled it reassembled it with the pin backwards. I didn't notice this until later on when I put the firearm completely back together, but man, was that a nightmare. So, now that we've got both of those pins driven out with the hole punch, we can slide this completely apart. Now, you'll see when it slides out, there's a whole lot of internal mechanisms that weren't previously visible. One of these mechanisms is actually a form of safety that we'll kind of get into in discussing this as we clean and wipe this firearm down with oil. So now the first thing to do with cleaning it is I'm going to take these cotton swabs, or you can also just use strips of an old t-shirt, and I'm going to spritz these down with a really good amount of solvent, but I want to go ahead and get these plastic bits out of the way because getting solvent on those really just isn't the best thing for the life term of those plastic bits. That's the mid-60s plastic. I don't want to damage it. So I'm going to go ahead and get those out of the way, set these swabs down, and then soak those down real good with solvent, and then start wiping that solvent on all of the parts of this firearm that are often exposed to the grit and mess of discharging a firearm. Now, in the process of doing this, I need to be very careful because there are a lot of very delicate little bits to this firearm. This little thing inside the trigger likes to fall out and was a little bit finicky. The spring is already fallen out there, which that's fine. I needed it to come out, and I'll put it back in later. And now, on top of doing all the little mechanical bits there, I'm going to go ahead and do the entire inside of the barrel and chamber portion of the firearm here. And this is a little bit more difficult to get into. You're definitely going to have to, kind of get inside there. One of the things I did here when I was spraying this spray is it actually missed the firearm at one point and went right over my shoulder. That's why you should wear eye protection whenever you do this. Try to keep your eyes and hands protected. All this stuff is generally bad for your skin and eyes. A lot of folks don't use gloves when they clean firearms. I do, because I don't like my hands to be completely wrecked and cracked. And both gun oil and solvent will crack your hands open. So now that I've gotten all of that kind of wiped down, I'm going to want to try to get inside here again a little bit better, and then also all spritz inside the barrel. And then we'll get to that in a moment. I'm going to have some difficulty, and we have a little bit of lost footage around that. But first, I'm really trying to get inside here where whenever this firearm discharges, it's going to drop just a ton of powder and deposits inside this little space right here. So this is just something you really want to work on. Now, normally after, every time you shoot the firearm, you're going to get a fairly decent amount of this out, because this is one of the, the few places where you are actually cleaning it quite frequently. But I just really want to get detailed in after it anyways. Now I'm getting more into the inside portions where I normally wouldn't get, and man, is that, the swabs are coming out dirty out of there, because in, several decades, it's never really been properly cleaned in those areas. So now that I've kind of gotten all that out, now we're going to have the hard part where we had problems. Normally I'd use a brass cleaning rod to run swabs down the barrel, and then I would go back through with a brush. I didn't have any of that because on footage because of camera issues. But we're going to go ahead and move on to oiling the firearm. And this is going to be more or less the same as cleaning it with solvent, where I wiped it all down with solvent, and then I also went over and wiped it with a dry swab. Well, now I'm going to go over all of it with these oil wipes that I have, gun oil, and this protects the metal from collecting moisture and then rusting and just general degradation of the metal. It also allows all the mechanical portions, which a revolver has many, to move and flow very easily and comfortably. It also gives the firearm a nice, pretty black sheen that we'll notice. And this also, there are some cleaning elements to this. These oil wipes, you'll notice as you go along, whenever you're cleaning a firearm, even after you've cleaned it with solvent, as you go along with oil wipes, you'll definitely notice them getting darker and, showing that they're picking up a good bit of debris and stuff, even after you've already went over it with cleaning swabs. That's just kind of the nature of it, and that's fine and good, and, the more cleaning, the better. I want to be very detailed in everything that I go over these oil swabs, especially these little tiny bits that move around each other a lot. And all these rods and connectors and just generally bits, I want to make sure that I'm getting that really nice and clean. Now, you can take this cylinder apart even further. I honestly don't 100% know how, and most things that I've seen as far as manuals regarding this say that it really isn't necessary. All the important moving bits you can get to without disassembling it, and so since it does work fairly well, I'm not going to bother with all of that. Now, while I'm oiling this, you can notice this bar that stands right in front of the hammer. That's actually a form of safety in this firearm. That prevents the hammer from being able to slap down onto a cartridge while the hammer has not been pulled back. So basically, whenever you pull the hammer all the way back, it'll allow that little rod to slide into a spot that allows the hammer to come down, but if the hammer isn't brought all the way back, it doesn't allow that to move out of the way. It just allows for an extra little safety so that this firearm can't bang against something and then go off in an accidental discharge. So, now we're going to go ahead and move forward. We're going to want to oil up all of these pins so that they go in and come out a little bit easier. This makes our video go by faster whenever I put those pins back in, and it also allows you to later on disassemble the firearm in a much more efficient and more enjoyable way than what I went through in this video. Also want to oil down that little spring there just to try to get a little bit going on for it. So, now that we've handled all of that, now we're going to move on to drying off all of this oil that we've put on. You don't want to remove all the oil, but you want to remove any runs, any pools, any excess bits of oil that exist on the firearm. And the reason for this is multifold. One is that you don't want to allow that oil to collect deposits whenever you fire the firearm. You don't want to just cause trap points, and then it's also just more comfortable for your hands to handle the firearm. So now we're going to go ahead and reassemble it. The first thing that we're going to want to do is slide this main piece right back up inside the other main piece and align our holes from where the pins were driven through. So that's just going to take a little bit of finagling, moving things around. And there we go. Now we're going to take the short pin, which goes into the front pin hole, and the long pin, which goes into the rear pin hole. I want to go ahead and line those up first. Now, I drove these in and out with, again, this hole punch that I have, and then with a rubber mallet. Now that I've got those back in there, we're going to go ahead and insert the spring. And we're going to go ahead and insert the plunger that goes into that spring. Now that's going to take a little bit of a finagling, and now I actually had some issues where the spring wasn't quite perfectly lined up, and but I had to take it apart, got it right back together. So you're just going to kind of have to fiddle with it until you get it right. That plunger should depress all the way in, and then you're able to slide the arm of this cylinder down into it, and it'll all click into place real nice and easy. That clicks right back in. Everything should move freely and comfortably. Now we're going to reassemble the grips. This is probably one of the most difficult parts of reassembling this firearm. So we're going to put both of these sandwiches together, and there's going to be a screw that goes through, and it screws into a bit of a nut on the other side. Now, the best way I figured to do this was to take 2 flathead screwdrivers, insert one into the nut and then one into the screw, and twist them counter-rotational to each other until it tightened up. This worked pretty well. I'm sure there's a better way you're supposed to do this, and it'd be a lot easier in a gun vise, but I was able to make it happen pretty comfortably on my desk table. And now I make sure, cycle everything through, make sure that everything works smoothly and comfortably, and there we go. You can like and subscribe here on YouTube. Also follow Handy with Handguns on Spotify and everywhere podcasts are found.